I'm back. It's me, Tiffany the Budgetista, your favorite financial educator. Welcome back to Money Glow Up from Yahoo Finance. Today we're talking about retirement. Is it even possible? Can you do it? How do you do it? I am going to help you debunk some of those myths. That's what we do here on Money Glow Up. You ready to talk retirement? Let's jump in. Here's the thing, retirement is the ultimate financial goal for so many of us. I'm us. But is it really a thing that can actually happen in our lifetime? Feels a little worrying. According to Bankrate, 57% of Americans feel like they're behind the eight ball when it comes to saving for retirement. And according to this BlackRock study, they found that 60% of folks feel like they're gonna outlive their retirement. Is that you? Are you worried? You might be thinking, but Tiffany, I don't know what to do, but that's okay. You don't have to, because today's guest knows exactly what to do. His name is Bob Powell, and you might know him because he has a podcast called Decoding Retirement here on yahoofinance.com. Bob is also a certified financial planner and just an all-around amazing guy. So let's welcome Bob to the stew. So if you want to make sure that you are ready for retirement, lean in, because we have Bob Powell in the studio today. He is the host of Yahoo Finance's Decoding Retirement podcast. And Bob is really going to help us to understand, is it too late to retire? Can we even retire these days? I mean, is that even a possibility? So welcome, Bob, to the stew. How are you, Bob?
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, what do you think? Well, first of all, do you think retirement is even attainable in today's society?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that two ways, Tiffany.
Okay.
One is by looking at sort of the numbers, right? If you're in the highest income quintile, you're fine.
Okay.
You won't have to worry about a thing. You're more than likely saving enough for retirement. If you're in the lowest income quintile, most of your pre-retirement income will be replaced by Social Security.
Okay.
If you're in the middle income quintiles, those are the people that need to worry about whether retirement is attainable or not. Now, the second part to my answer is this. What's attainable? Is it your desired standard of living or something less than desired?
Okay.
So if it's something that you want to have that's your desired standard of living, I think what you need to think about is this is going to require a lot of work, right? You need to sort of work at this as much as you do at your job,
Okay.
right? So you need to think about setting up a plan and then reviewing it annually. It's not something that you can set and forget and hope that 40 years from now you look at it and say, oh, I didn't save enough. I didn't accumulate enough for my desired standard of living. So you need to start thinking about, what are my goals? What will be my sources of income? What will my expenses be in retirement? What are the risks that I will face in retirement, and how will I manage and mitigate those risks?
Okay.
And what's my life expectancy in retirement? You can't just use average life expectancy as your target retirement years. You've got to look beyond that, maybe plan to age 95. Then, on the other hand, if you want something less than desired, that's attainable too. It just means that you have to sort of lower your expectations and live, now we often tell people that you need to live below your means when you're saving for retirement. If you have a less than desired standard of living in retirement, you will definitely be living well below your means in retirement.
So why do you think people get so anxious about achieving their retirement goals? I feel like this anxiousness kind of keeps them back from making a move. Why do you think we get so nervous about what that looks like?
I think, for one, there's a lot of uncertainty about it. And I always tell people that if you were to tell me your date of death, I could build you the perfect retirement plan, right? But we don't know our date of death.
Yeah.
So that's one big uncertainty. Am I planning for 10 years of retirement or 30 years of retirement? Those are very different savings goals, right?
Yeah.
And so the other things would be, will my spouse predecease me, or will I predecease my spouse? Those are very different, uncertain outcomes, right? And then what are my retirement expenses in retirement? You're asking a 25-year-old to think about what their expenses will be 45 years from now. I don't know what my expenses will be tomorrow sometime. So, it's really hard to estimate what your expenses will be in retirement. And it's equally hard to estimate what your sources of income will be in retirement. Will there be Social Security? Will it all come from your 401k? Will you have other sources of income, like maybe you have rental property? Or will you be working in retirement, either full or part-time, for income? These are questions you can't answer. Certainly you can't answer when you're 25 or 30 or 35.
It's so hard. It feels like
hard,
right?
Tiffany. It's hard. I wish it was easier.
Right? So what are the misconceptions? So if I'm somebody who's listening or watching, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, so I think the reason why people feel so much anxiety also too is because they don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. So what are some of those misconceptions that maybe they're wrong about when it comes to retirement planning?
Well, I think some of the things that they're wrong about is that it's not attainable, right? And I think if you boil it back and say, okay, let me work on the things that I can control. I can control how much I can save for retirement. I can control whether I save 5 or 10 or 15%. And I can also sort of use her heuristics, right? I can use benchmarks to say, am I on target? So T. Rowe Price and Fidelity and others have these savings targets, and they say you should have 1 times your salary saved by age 30, or you should have 4 times saved by age 40, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
And by the time you get to 65, you should have 10 to 12 times your final year salary set aside. So make it simple, right? Make it consumable so that you don't get overwhelmed by all the uncertainty that exists around retirement planning.
I didn't realize that they were kind of like these benchmarks that you can kind of set your clock to so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So, Bob, is there like the perfect age to retire? I mean, now, but when we're thinking about like the right age, is there like some algorithm that says, well, really, I know we all hear 65, but is that true?
Yeah, I don't think 65 is the right age anymore. And I think that's the case for a couple reasons. One is most people born after 1960, their full retirement age to get the 100% of their scheduled benefits from Social Security is 67, right? And we also know a couple things. The life expectancy has been increasing. COVID sort of put a damper on that, but generally life expectancy has been increasing. So the average 65-year-old, 67-year-old can expect to live maybe into their 80s. So, that's the average, right? Half of those people will die before the average and half will live beyond the average.
My dad's in his 80s.
Right? So he needs to plan for a longer life expectancy. So I think ultimately the age at which you retire is the age at which you can fund your expected years in retirement.
Yeah, because he's been retired, I don't even know. I think he retired in his 60s. I feel like I'm like, when is the last time he worked? No, he's retired CFO, but he was very meticulous about setting aside for retirement because that was his profession as well. So, no, I love that. So I think people are really confused about Social Security. We all hear that Social Security there's not going to be any money. But what age can you start receiving Social Security? But then what age do you max out about your receiving?
Well, so you can start as early as 62, but you'll get a greatly reduced benefit for the rest of your life, and you can get it. You can get it anytime between 62 and age 70.
Okay.
And at age 70, that's when you benefit the most from what are called delayed retirement credits, and that will be your highest benefit. And the reason I often tell people to wait until 70 to collect Social Security is not only to collect the highest benefit for themselves, but assuming you're the highest earner in the family, your spouse will receive the highest survivor's benefit. And sometimes I think what we need to think about retirement planning is a household decision, right? A lot of times people will say, oh, I'm going to claim Social Security at 62. To heck with, my spouse. But I think your spouse, there's a reason why, especially in this country, 10% of widows live in poverty, right? And so I think sometimes in the case where the husband may be the highest earner in a marriage, they need to think about their surviving spouse because oftentimes men predecease their wives.
So I'm a widow, unfortunately. My husband passed away 3 years ago. He was only 40. He had an aneurysm. And so what does that look like? So I've heard that. So I have a bonus daughter. She was 15 at the time. So she's getting Social Security, but now she's 18, so not anymore. But I know that I can potentially collect Social Security, I guess if I don't get married again.
So there are a lot of rules, so many rules around Social Security.
Okay.
They have this thing called the OPM. It's like thousands of pages long. Survivors can get it.
Okay.
Spouses can get it.
Okay.
You need to be, in the case of an ex-spouse, let's say you need to have been married for at least 10 years.
Okay.
And then survivor's benefits, you should be able to collect as early as 60 for survivor's benefits.
Okay.
But you need to double check.
Okay.
And if you call Social Security, you should call them like 2 or 3 times to make sure that the information that you're getting from the rep there is the same and accurate, like from rep to rep to rep. Because oftentimes it's not a fault of Social Security, but it's complicated.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're getting the right advice.
Yeah, Social Security just always seems like this, I don't know, just seems also so confusing. But so just thinking about Social Security, is it even really going to be enough to live off of? Like what is it on average that people receive?
Yeah, so right now I think it's somewhere around $1,400 is the average monthly benefit, and that's not necessarily enough for most people to live on. But like I mentioned earlier, if you're in the lowest income quintile, Social Security oftentimes replaces almost 85 to 100% of your pre-retirement income. On the other hand, if you're in the highest income quintile, it may only replace 15% of your income. So it varies for different people, but I wouldn't necessarily depend on it as being the only source of income in retirement.
Oh my gosh, Bob. So this conversation is so great. I have a really important question to ask you next. But first, we're going to take a break because you need a break. Well, we need a break. We're going to pay some bills. We're going to be right back with more Bob Powell and retirement. And we are back. Do you feel a little less broke? I hope so, because Bob is going to help us plan for the future. So if I'm watching this and it's like, this is not me, but what if I haven't started to set aside for retirement? And I'm a little bit nervous. So break me through, like, if I'm in my, early on in my career, if I'm middle-aged, but what if I'm older? Like, so what's like number one thing you should do, beginning, middle, and end?
Yeah, so if you're in your 20s and you haven't started and you work for a company that provides you with the 401k, sign up for it straight away and sign up to receive as much of the company's employer match as possible. So maybe 6% will get you 3% company match, and that brings you to at least a 9% savings rate. Good place to start for someone in their 20s.
Okay.
How you might invest will vary, right? If you're someone who has no interest in the markets and don't want to learn about it, a target date fund is probably good enough for you to get started. If, on the other hand, you're a student of the subject, like one of my sons is, then I would suggest that maybe you take a different route. Maybe you start investing entirely in index funds, an S&P 500 or an international fund. And because you have time on your side, you could probably invest 90 to 100% of your money in equities, because you have a very long time horizon. If you're in your 30s and 40s and you're sort of behind the 8 ball, I think this is a time where you have to sort of start reviewing your expenses. What are your essential expenses and what are your discretionaries? And look for ways to maybe cut back on some of your discretionary expenses and start putting some of that money to work in your retirement account. And then by the time you get to your 50s, you'll be able to take advantage of catch-up contributions, right? Which is sort of this great gift that says, hey, we know you're human. We know that you dilly-dally. We know that you procrastinated. So we're going to give you an opportunity to catch up even more than what was legally allowed when you were in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. So take advantage of catch-up contributions. The other thing I would say is if you're really, really, really behind the 8 ball, there's a couple things that you can do. You can obviously save more. You can invest maybe a little bit aggressively. That's a little bit harder to do for some people. But there was research done a little bit ago that said working 2 additional years beyond what you expected to work would be the greatest thing that you could do to improve your chances of achieving retirement security. So work a little bit longer is the next thing I would tell people to do.
Okay, because people hit me up sometimes and I could tell they're scared and they're like, because maybe they had kids and they just never got around to it. And so, no, that was really great.
Well, and it's interesting because people in their 30s and 40s, right, they have kids, they have a mortgage, they're saving for college, they're saving for retirement. There's so many demands on their money.
Yes.
And the one thing I'll tell people is you can't necessarily borrow for your retirement, but you can borrow for college. So if you're caught between this, what do I do? I'd say default to your retirement savings and, have the children maybe cover some of their costs.
Yeah, and it's okay. It's okay, parents. So Bob, so realistically, how much should we be saving for retirement? Is there a percentage? Is there an amount?
Yeah, I'd say, somewhere between 10 and 15% is a good target. Maybe 10% when you're younger because maybe you don't have as much discretionary income. Maybe rent is taking up the bulk of your expenses, So aim for 10% maybe when you're younger and then try to escalate it up to 15%. And the good news is the faster you can escalate, the faster it is that you'll probably attain a nest egg that's sufficient to fund your desired standard of living. And maybe, just maybe, you might be able to retire a little bit sooner than you had planned if you're able to accumulate a large enough nest egg.
Okay, so let's break it down, okay, by generation. So where should people be in their retirement journey? So I don't know where you are listening. So if you're a baby boomer, I'm Generation X. I just missed the millennials, but that's okay, because they're crazy. So baby boomer, X, millennials, and then Z. So where should you be on your journey? Like how, because you mentioned it briefly, but where should you be as far as how much you should have set aside?
All right, so I'll start with the end in mind, which is when you're in your 60s, you should aim to have 10 to 12 times your final year salary salary set aside in your nest egg.
Okay.
Right? So that if you're earning $100,000, right, 10 times that is $1 million, right? So, or 1.2. If you're earning 200, it would be 2 million. If you're in your 20s, aim to have one time your salary set aside by age 30, and then just keep escalating that,
Okay.
3 times by age 30, I'm sorry, 3 to 4 times by age 40, 5 to 6 times by age 50, and then 10 to 12 times.
Well, if I have 10 times, say if I have $1 million, I'm in my 60s, is that going to be enough really to last me? Am I doing the 4% rule?
Good question, Tiffany, right? I mean, everything depends, right? I mean, it's like the common answer when I talk to financial planners. Well, it depends. It might be enough, right? And so we're using sort of general guidelines. So let's say you have $1 million set aside and you use the 4% rule, which means that you'd be able to withdraw starting using $40,000 per year, adjusted for inflation over the course of your retirement. $40,000 plus your Social Security, plus whatever other income you have. Take a look at that and say, does that represent roughly 80% of my pre-retirement income? Okay. So let's say you were earning $100,000, you were pulling $40,000 from your $1 million. Let's say you were getting $30,000 from your Social Security, so now you're up to $70,000. I just need to replace $10,000 more to hit the 80% mark. Can I get that through working part-time, or can I get that by, I don't know, maybe I have an Airbnb, or maybe I have other sources of income. Maybe I have a pension even. So yes, that $1 million could be enough if your salary was $100,000 and you're pulling out $40,000 per year.
Okay.
It just really means crunching the numbers.
Yes. So, Bob, if someone is behind in their savings, like what are some things that they could do to maximize? Because you mentioned like cutting back, but what are some things that they could do to maximize to move forward? So let's just say I'm a young person and I'm like, I'm in my 20s now, I'm getting my first job and I kind of blew most of my money. Yeah. My credit card debt is already looking crazy.
Yeah. So, a lot of times people use the 100 minus your age to come up with your asset allocation. And they'll say 100 minus 20 means I should be invested 80% in stocks and 20% in bonds. What I might suggest is if you're behind the 8 ball and you have some risk tolerance, right? And I'd say even if you don't have risk tolerance, consider investing aggressively. Yeah. The markets will go up and down, but you have a very long time horizon to both save and to live through retirement. So there's been some research done that suggests that if you were to put 2/3 of your money into international equities and 1/3 into U.S. equities, that you would accumulate more money at the time of retirement, that you'd be able to withdraw more money during retirement, and that you'd be able to have a larger bequest, once you pass on and leave your money to your heirs. So if you can stomach the ups and downs of a 100% equity portfolio, I might suggest that's something that someone does in their 30s to sort of make up for the ground that they lost when they were in their 20s.
It's funny because I'm such a grandma. when I worked for my financial advisor.
But you're not a grandma.
I know, but I think I had her put like 70% in equity. She's like, Tiffany, at the time I was 38, 30. She's like, that's not aggressive enough. And then I have nieces and nephews that are younger, and I set aside money for them every year, and in a custodial account. And they're 7, 8, so 100%. And let's just say their returns were looking so amazing, and she was like, this could be you. And so it shifted, so I'm now 90%. And so, because I have the stomach for the ups and downs, I do not have, yes.
So there's one thing I might add though, if you're in your 20s and 30s, there's a theory called the life cycle hypothesis, which says that when you're younger, the bulk of your capital is your human capital, right? Your earnings potential. And I'd say the one thing that you ought to consider doing, besides investing aggressively, is invest aggressively in your career. Right? Go get certifications, go get advanced degrees, go get whatever education you can do to improve your earning power. And that is perhaps, the best advice I could give someone that's, in their 20s or 30s besides investing aggressively.
I want to get a deeper understanding, and I'm sure some folks listening, they're like, okay, I think I've heard of target date funds. I've definitely heard of the S&P 500. Can you break down for me, what are those two, and are they the same? What am I looking at here?
Yeah, entirely different. So a target date fund is it's something that commonly people, plan participants, employees invest in their workplace retirement plan. And in essence, what a target date fund is a fund of funds.
Okay.
And initially, when someone might be in their 20s, long before they're going to retire, long before their target date, the fund will be invested more aggressively than conservatively. Let's say 80% stocks and 20% bonds.
Okay.
And then over time, the asset allocation of that fund, as it gets closer and closer to the target date, becomes more and more conservative. So by the time someone retires, maybe it's 40% equities, and 60% bonds.
Okay.
And so that gives people, a traditional sort of way to invest is 100 minus your age. So that's what a target date fund is doing, is essentially reducing the amount of equity that you're invested in over the course of time. An S&P 500 fund is essentially a 100% equity fund. It's comprised of the S&P 500 stocks that are in that index.
Okay.
And if you were to invest in that, it would be much more volatile in terms of market volatility than, say, a target date fund. Let's say a target date fund goes up and down maybe 10% each year, up 10%, down 10%. I'm making that number up.
Yeah.
An S&P 500 fund, however, will be much more volatile. Maybe some years it's up 20, down 20, up 30, down 30. And so what happens is when people are investing in an S&P 500, they typically have a greater tolerance for risk, a greater propensity to take on risk. They can withstand the ups and downs of the market.
Okay.
A target date fund may be designed for someone who is more conservative in nature and less willing to sort of manage their money. The good thing about a target date fund is it automatically rebalances. And that's one of the things that we often tell people to do with their investments is to rebalance every year so that it matches your time horizon, your investment objective, and your risk tolerance. And with an S&P 500 fund, you really aren't rebalancing. You're just owning 100% equities and you're just riding the market.
And neither one of these, you can't pick your individual investments. You kind of just have to invest what's ever in the
So if you're in a 401k retirement plan, typically not. If you're investing outside of it, you could create your own target date fund with ETFs, for instance, and then just have to manage it on your own. With an S&P 500 fund, you could certainly do what's called fractional investing and maybe pick out certain stocks from the index that you want to invest in and exclude others. It gets a little more sophisticated at that point. You need to be much more of a student of the subject, I think, but it's doable.
Okay. So either way, if you're going to start, the target date fund is a great place to start. And if you're willing to do a little bit more work, S&P 500, and have the stomach for the ups and downs.
Yeah. And if you're young, you should be able to have the stomach for the ups and downs because you have not only 45 years, say, of investing, but 30 plus years of in retirement. So a 70-year time horizon. You can suffer some ups and downs.
So when does young get cut off? Like, what is that, like when you say when you're young, so is it like by 35, by 40? So, I mean, as far as, not because we're all young at heart, but meaning like young in money.
I think, so again, I'll refer to a research report that came out that said it's a invest in 100% equities for the course of saving for and living in retirement.
I like to do a little recap. As I mentioned before, I used to be a school teacher. So as people listen and watch, I like them to kind of have this concrete recap at the end. You let me know, you're going to give the grade this time. You let me know if I'm going to get an A, okay? So 1, start early and as quickly as possible. And if you don't know how to do anything else, a target date fund is a great place to start. That being more aggressive, especially if you have the time horizon, is going to be your best bet. It's never too late. And if you are starting a little bit later, it might mean that you have to work a little longer, that you're going to have to cut back a little more. But as long as you're still here, there's still the possibility of setting aside for yourself.
A plus.
A plus, yes. Thank you so much for coming, Bob. You can catch Bob on Decoding Retirement Tuesdays at noon on yahoofinance.com, just like me, Tiffany the Budgetnista. Again, if you need any other financial resources and you want to get good with money, go ahead to getgoodwithmoney.com. And I am here at yahoofinance.com every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Wherever you're streaming, you can find me there as well. And I want you to remember one thing, that if you don't do anything else, just start. Just start. Investing in yourself is investing in growing wealth. I'll see you next week.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.